Like Erin, I'm normally based in Naarm in Melbourne. Today I'm in Canberra, conducting some interviews for this very project that I'm going to be sharing with you all today. So just bear with me one moment. I'm going to share my screen. And I would love for you to let me know if that's working. Just give me a thumbs up. Erin, has that screen share come up? Yeah, great. Excellent. All right, so you've already done an excellent introduction of me, so I don't need to introduce myself at all, which is nice. So I'll jump straight into it. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about developmental evaluation, and my understanding is that people might be interested to learn a little bit about the theoretical background of developmental evaluation, where it comes from, what it means. So I'm going to be sharing some of that. I'm going to be sharing a little bit of information about the kind of distinguishing features of developmental evaluation approaches and the 8 key principles that underpin a developmental evaluation approach. So I'll share those with you, and then I'll jump into sharing with you an overview of the project that I'm working on. And like Erin said, that's going to be a case example. The project's called Regional Stewardship of Aged Care. And I'm going to outline a little bit of information about our evaluation approach. I'll go into our methodology, not in great detail, but what I've really tried to do in outlining the methodology for you today is highlight what are the developmental components of the methodology that we're using to evaluate regional stewardship of aged care. So I'll outline that approach, and then I'll share with you some kind of key learnings, some key takeaways that I have based on the work that I've done so far on that project. And yeah, Erin, like Erin says, please feel free to pop any questions that you have at any point throughout the presentation into the chat, and we should be able to get to those at the end, if not a little bit during the presentation. So, developmental evaluation is the brainchild of renowned evaluation expert Michael Quinn-Patton, and I'm sure some of you would have heard of Michael Quinn-Patton. He's an evaluation expert based in the United States. Michael has been a leading kind of evaluator, sharing information about a number of different approaches, developmental evaluation, also utilization-focused evaluation. You might have heard of principles-focused evaluation. So there's lots of different types of evaluation associated with Michael Quinn-Patton. And I thought that a really great way to introduce developmental evaluation would be to share some of the texts, some of the kind of preeminent texts or important texts that I've selected. So if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into developmental evaluation, you can read any of these texts. The first one's great. It's a developmental evaluation primer by Jamie Gamble, and it's quite short and succinct and has some really useful information about developmental evaluation. Then we've got Michael Quinn-Patton's Developmental Evaluation, Applying Complexity Concepts to Enhance Innovation and Use. And that's a really deep dive into developmental evaluation and some of the underpinning theories behind developmental evaluation. Then we've got the developmental evaluation exemplars, and I'll be talking through the 8 principles that are articulated in that book. And a developmental evaluation companion by Jamie Gamble, Kate McKagan, Mark Cabage, which I also recommend if you're looking for practical examples of developmental evaluation and some of the challenges that other practitioners have faced and how they've overcome those challenges in developmental evaluation. I first came across, I'm going to call it DE, a number of times throughout the presentation, so I'll get that acronym out of the way up front. I first came across DE when I was working in the Department of Education, and I was quite attracted to it because I liked that it was underpinned by a systems thinking and a more complexity-aware approach to evaluation. I also really liked the idea of it leaning into influencing design, because I think that evaluation has an important role to play in influencing the design of programs, policies, or initiatives. And I was lucky enough to travel to the United States and present at the AEA conference. And I met Michael Quinn-Patton and his daughter, Charmaine Patton, who's also doing a lot of work in developmental evaluation. And I know that they're coming up with they've got a new framework that they presented there. So I just wanted to note that this approach is something that's not static. It's evolving over time, and Michael's still continuing to kind of iterate his way of communicating developmental evaluation and share some of what he's learning about the approach. So I know that there's an ADAPT framework in the works, and maybe that's something we can present on in the future. But I just wanted to note that it's an evolving approach. What is it? So developmental evaluation is defined by its purpose distinction, and that's what really defines it from other types of evaluation or other approaches to evaluation. So when we think about formative evaluation approaches, the purpose really is to improve something, but it's often something that, and that something could be a program, policy, project, initiative. It's often something that is mostly developed. So it's something that we want to measure the fidelity of in practice, or we want to measure the implementation of in practice. And whereas summative evaluations are about, did that thing actually work? And they're usually conducted at the end of the evaluation. So you've got formative and you've got summative. But what about if you're kind of innovating or building something new? What about if you're adapting something in response to a lot of change in conditions? Or if you're working in an environment like so many of us are in this modern day that is characterized by significant change or unpredictability. So DE really emerged in this context. It emerged as an approach that can deal with complexity and innovative contexts so that evaluators can be really responsive to the evolving needs and not get in the way of innovation, essentially. So it's particularly useful if we don't have enough evidence or a strong kind of knowledge base to decide what to do, or when a solution is really complex, such that innovators need to get in and test and trial things, learn quickly, adapt, change, and implement new approaches. So like formative and summative, it's an approach. I'm going to be using that term. It's an approach. It's not a methodology. So it doesn't have any prescribed steps or any required data collection methods. My colleague Kate McKegg likes to say it's methods agnostic, which means you can use qualitative, quantitative. You often use mixed methods, and you actually need to be quite adaptive as an evaluator. So I actually find that having the technical evaluation skills behind you, so knowing and understanding some key technical evaluation skills is really important, because you will bring those into the evaluation, but you also might bring skills from other fields. And we often do, like the design field or the social innovation field. So you can be quite flexible and adaptive in the methods that you bring to bear to support the evaluation. These are the key principles, and I wanted to talk about them because they are kind of what underpins my approach to developmental evaluation. When I think about what it is, I think about, am I working in these ways? Am I applying these principles and these standards when I work with clients? So they're kind of like a guiding light for me. And the first one is developmental purpose. So I spoke about that. It's about really building something new or adapting something that's emerging and changing rapidly according to context. That's the first principle. The second principle is evaluation rigor. And what that means is that even in an innovation context, we are still bringing all of the rigor from the evaluation field and from research methods. So all of the technical rigor that we have as part of evaluation and the credibility to the process of developing and innovating something, we're really bringing that. And for me, rigor in this sense actually means having a really systemic and transparent approach to collecting and synthesizing information. And it also means having a really transparent and systematic approach to how we make judgments or decisions. So we're being really clear about the process to making a decision. And rigor also, I think, means involving multiple perspectives when we make a decision. It means applying evaluative thinking, asking really probing questions, and combining different forms of evidence to reach conclusions about quality or value. D is also utilisation focused, and that means that we actually conduct the evaluation in ways that are intended to enhance the usefulness of the findings and the evaluation. So we spend a lot of time in developmental evaluation asking ourselves the question, who is this evaluation for? What kind of information do they need? What decisions do they have to make? Who is it going to be used by? And that actually influences our decisions about how we collect the data. It also really influences how we report on the data, and means that we can report in lots of different ways, using dashboards, using small mini learning briefs if we need to report something quickly and in a more succinct way, or you can use a longer evaluation report that's underpinned by stronger forms of evidence. But utilisation is really about being focused on the use of the evaluation. It takes a complexity perspective. And what that means is that we interpret development through a complexity lens. We recognise that situations can be uncertain, emergent and dynamic, and that evaluation can be responsive to this reality. And for me, a key part of that is seeing the world as interconnected and starting to think about understanding the patterns of relationships across and the complexity of the systems that we're working in. So complexity and systems thinking are whole fields in and of themselves that would require, multiple presentations to cover it. I won't be able to cover them in full. I'm just providing a little nugget summary there, and I guess reflecting on how it shows up in my own practice. Systems thinking, again, like I said, it's a whole field. It's a really important standard in DE, and for me, it's about adopting this holistic approach and considering how different parts of the system interact and how they can influence the whole. And there are lots of key concepts in systems thinking that can come into and influence a developmental evaluation, things like understanding interrelationships. Kate McKeag often talks about engaging with contrasting perspectives and reflecting ethically on the boundaries of the system that we're operating in. And this is particularly relevant in innovation contexts. Co-creation is about this perspective that developmental evaluators can be embedded within the program or project team. So some traditional forms of evaluation see evaluators as needing to be at arm's length, remain completely independent from those who are implementing the initiative. But developmental evaluators can be a little bit more embedded with the program or project so that we can actually inform and contribute to modifications in its design, and so that we can understand context, really, so that we understand the context of the program really, really well, and we can design in a more iterative way our evaluation approach. But we also can remain as developmental evaluators independent from the implementing staff. So it's an interesting balance that we're holding where we are a little bit more embedded, but we also want to play a critical friend role where we can be really open and honest about when things aren't working. And I think the key to that is creating a learning culture where we can have conversations about things that are not working and feel comfortable speaking about taking a critical analytical lens to our project. The last principle is something that I often hear people reflect back when they think about developmental evaluation, and that is that timely feedback. So rapid real-time feedback is quite important in developmental evaluation, and particularly in innovation contexts where you're trying to learn really quickly whether something is or isn't working, or what's going well, what isn't going well. You're trying to feed that back to the innovators quite quickly so that they can actually make decisions. And you've probably heard that term, building the plane while flying it. And that's the context that you're often in when you're a developmental evaluator. You're working with people who are literally trying to build the thing while fly it, and they need to learn quickly and iterate and understand what the evidence is telling them so that they can make decisions based on evidence as quickly as possible. And again, there are tensions around that. You can't always collect data really rapidly. There are some forms of data that obviously And there are some data collection methods that need to be more longitudinal. So you're holding a balance there of how much do I feed back rapidly versus how much do we need to collect data that is consistent over time so that we can compare and identify trends over time. That's getting a bit technical. But they are, oh, I'll go back. They are the key developmental evaluation principles. And that's the key kind of description of developmental evaluation. I might pause there. I don't think there are any questions yet, Erin.
There is a question.
Oh, great.
Yes.
We have a question.
Yeah, we have a good question. Just wondering if you could expand a bit more on the innovation principle.
Yeah. Yeah, so one aspect of did I not even mention it? Maybe I didn't mention, maybe I missed it. Okay. It's really often DE occurs in an innovation context, and it's about being quite innovative in how we work. So we work often with those who are innovating, who are trying to rapidly change something or who are designing something new for a system. And we support that, and it's really kind of the niche of developmental evaluation, and where it emerged from is having a form of evaluation that can actually support real-time adaptation and that can provide feedback on context and can provide feedback to innovators so that they can try new things, learn, and change what they're doing pretty rapidly. Does that make sense?
I think so. If, Anne, you asked the question, I don't know if that helped answer that for you, but if you wanted to seek any further clarification from Zoe, feel free to unmute. Otherwise, we'll carry forth.
Right.
She's happy. Yeah, that's good. All right. Does anyone else have any questions at this point as well you want to pop in the chat before we move forward? Might just give you a second to do that.
I said to Erin, nobody asks me to speak for 45 minutes. So it's both exciting to be able to go deeper into the content that I share.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's nice to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And if you joined us a little late, just making you aware that if you've got questions, please pop them in the chat. And we'll ask Zoe to answer those at key points. All right, we have no further questions. So Zoe, feel free to carry on.
All right. Let's dive into regional stewardship of aged care. So just introducing regional stewardship. For those of you who know a little bit about aged care, you will know that in Australia, quite a lot of our aged care is funded by our Commonwealth Government. And if we think back to 2018, there were some repeated and quite publicised reports of abuse and neglect in the aged care system. And also there was a consideration around how does an ageing population continue to deliver a high quality of aged care for its population into the future. And so these things triggered a Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. And the Royal Commission went for 3 years, and it identified several key problems that are kind of impeding the quality and safety of aged care in Australia. And in 2021, the Royal Commission released their final report, and it had 148 recommendations for aged care reform in Australia. So it's quite a substantial amount of reform that was being recommended, and a once in a generation new act, a new Aged Care Act was recommended as well. And you can see I've shared there the recommendation from the Royal Commission. The Department of Health should have a focus on stewardship of the aged care system and all of its component parts. So the key problem that was identified, or one of the key problems that was identified in the Royal Commission, was that the government didn't have strong enough engagement with the sector on the ground and wasn't able to responsively or be responsive to the needs of providers and older people, because the perception by the Royal Commission was that there wasn't a significant enough level of engagement across the sector. So they recommended this reform in stewardship and reform in governance, based on this concept of stewardship. And the concept of stewardship really grew from an understanding that directive kind of command and control approaches to governance are not really meeting the needs of complex systems. And the stated aim of stewardship is to ensure that component parts of the system actually work together in a really efficient and effective way, and that the component parts of the system working together and through engaging with people directly on the ground, that government could improve the quality of aged care. So it really involves a couple of things in my mind. It involves a bit of a shift in thinking about governance, such that the department's being asked to take a much more proactive role in stewarding the system and a more proactive role in taking responsibility for the outcomes that older people experience across the aged care system. And there was a sense that they could achieve that through having a well-connected network of problem solvers that could monitor and respond to local needs. So to achieve this greater outreach and additional stakeholder engagement, the department invested in 7 new Commonwealth offices in regional and remote locations all around Australia, and they hired around 88 new staff to cities and regional sites. So there was a really big increase in capacity and capability of the public service. And what this kind of led to is this budget measure called Regional Stewardship of Aged Care. And so in mid-2023, the department commissioned a 3-year developmental evaluation to support the rollout of this new stewardship initiative. Clear Horizon came on board to conduct that evaluation, and I'm now leading it, and I have a great team of supporters, including our evaluation partner, Kate McKegg, who's a real expert in developmental evaluation and has done a lot to build my capacity and capability as a developmental evaluator. We also have another partner, Julian King, who is a kind of health economist and evaluator who has done a lot of work on value for money and has a new approach called value for investment. And so we're leveraging that as part of this evaluation. We've also got 2 experts from La Trobe University, professors in aged care, who have been helping us. And we've got a fantastic internal team as well, of Eugene Liston and Heidi Peterson, who are really supporting the implementation of this evaluation. So when we came on board, we were aware that all these teams across Australia had begun implementing stewardship in varying ways. And there was a really limited understanding of what was being how it was being put into practice, or the outcomes that were being experienced on the ground. And it had really evolved as an approach, and it had evolved in response to things like COVID-19. So at the time, Jane Dickinson, who's one of our clients in the department, had the foresight to say, we don't want a traditional evaluation that kind of sits back and doesn't give us any findings for another year. We really want a form of evaluation that can help us improve, can help us firstly understand what stewardship is and what it looks like in practice on the ground, and that can help us actually roll out stewardship and iterate it so that we can improve how it's being delivered on the ground, and so that we can change the model if we need to, and so that we have kind of evidence of it being applied across the system and what it looks like in different contexts, so that we can kind of gather this more nuanced data about the similarities and the differences across different contexts. So Jane really thought the developmental evaluation was the right thing for that, and I agree. And I think that's because developmental evaluation can contribute to the design of initiatives, and it sees evaluators providing this kind of real-time or close to real-time feedback and testing different solutions. So they are flying, building the plane while flying it, so to speak, and we're working in a context of quite significant reform and change in the aged care sector. So even though it's a really large scale governance piece, it's also quite innovative in how it's being implemented. And there isn't a huge body of evidence about what system stewardship looks like when applied to a kind of aged care operative government model. So there's a lot of learning going on. We conducted a big literature review, and it found that there's a lot of There's a lot of talk about stewardship happening across different sectors, but not a lot of guidance on what it looks like to implement a stewardship model of governance in the aged care sector at a national level. So they're really learning as they go. And I want to talk now about the evaluation methodology and just give you a bit of background of what that looks like. So we have 3 phases of developmental evaluation that we use at Clear Horizon, and Jess Stark, our CEO, came up with these. The first one, there's a gardening analogy. So we start by kind of preparing the ground, and that means that we set up the right conditions for learning. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've done that. And hopefully I'll try to point out where I think the developmental evaluation principles come into our methodology as well. Incubate and grow, that second phase of the developmental evaluation, is all about continuing to strengthen that container for learning, but actually applying more rigorous evaluation approaches or methods that are really responsive to need, asking those big questions about what information is going to be useful to make decisions, and choosing the right research methods or the right evaluation methods for that context. And then harvest and reseed is all about codifying the design. So bringing it all back together and thinking about, okay, what actually is stewardship now that we've done all of this work? What does it look like? How has it evolved over time? And what might that mean for further investment in stewardship? So each phase has what we call an adaptive and technical activities, and there's also outputs. One thing that I'd say we've learned about DE, and I'll speak about this a little bit later, is that when you're on a project for a long time, and I'd say in 3 years, I mean, it's not a really long time, but it's a time for an evaluator to be on a project. And I'd say there's always a need to think about the summative aspects of the evaluation as well. So we always need to morph almost into thinking about outcomes and keeping those front of mind, particularly as we get to the kind of end of a funding cycle, or where we get to the point where we need to start making decisions about whether to continue something. So our evaluation does have summative components, and that's predominantly the value for investment approach. And I'm not going to talk about that a lot today because I really want to focus on the DE components, but I will just say that summative does come into it, in my view. So phase 1 was really about, we called this the discovery phase, and it is that preparing the ground phase. We were extremely lucky. We had from June to December, that's 6 months to do discovery work. And during that time, what we did is we really focused on building relationships and understanding context. They were our 2 key priorities and and what we kind of allocated a lot of our time and investment in. We wanted to understand as evaluators the complex health and aged care context. We also wanted to understand what stewardship looked like when it was being delivered in different states and territories, what it looked like when it was being delivered in urban locations versus rural locations. And so we did a range of the technical skills that we would often do in a traditional evaluation, such as a literature review, consultations, and a data audit to understand the existing data. But we also did quite a lot of what I would call adaptive things. So we went all around the country visiting each of the state and territory offices so that we could meet with the public servants working there face to face. We could explain the evaluation approach to them, and then we could learn a bit about how they were actually implementing a stewardship approach in their context. So we spoke with quite a lot of people. There are 200 staff in the local network in total, and we spoke to 169, so we had quite a big sample there. And then that really helped us develop an understanding of the work that they were doing. It also helped us communicate the role of DE. It helped us build trust, and it formed the basis of the logic model that we developed for the project. So we did a huge amount of consultation before we even got to the point of actually saying, this is the logic model, or this is a version, or this is our first version of the logic model. And it was really important because for us as developmental evaluators, we want to work in relational and collaborative ways. And we want to update our methods according to what kind of evidence is needed. So we really need to have an understanding of what staff on the ground need. And I think that speaks to the utilisation focus and the complexity aware principles. We really found that stewardship varied from place to place, depending on a range of contextual factors, which for me, again, just highlights how important context is in evaluation. So things like being able to recruit to certain locations, the level of collaboration between state and federal funders of aged care, big variations between what it looked like when you were operating in an urban environment where you had really dense populations and you had a dense number of providers versus when you were operating in a regional or rural location where you might have a thin market, where you might have a lot less providers, but you can develop stronger and closer relationships with them more easily. So there were a lot of differences and similarities that we actually sought to capture. Secondly, it really helped us build trust with the local teams. So we got to meet them in person, they got to ask us questions, they got to build an understanding of evaluation. That's another key part of DE for me, is about actually building the capability of those that we're working with to understand what our language is and what we're talking about when we talk about evaluation. And I guess it felt a little bit more participatory. We also meet with our key contexts once a week. So we meet with our clients quite regularly, and that helps us become a little bit more embedded. I'd say in this particular project, we are not fully embedded. It's a national initiative. And because it's government, I think there's an important role that we play in maintaining some of our independence from implementing the approach. But we do have really strong relationships with our clients, and that enables us to be a little bit more flexible in how we apply our evaluation methods and approaches. And it helps us play a critical friend role as well. We've built trust, and so over time, that means you can be a little bit more open and honest with your findings, and people tend to listen to you because they respect you. So that's that. And then we've got the output that we delivered that I mentioned. So I mentioned a logic model, and you don't always have to have a logic model in a DE, but this one did because government really wanted a logic model for this approach. And so we helped them develop the logic model from the ground up. I think that's the really important part of this. We didn't say, this is what stewardship looks like, and then go down and tell staff on the ground this is what it looks like. That had been done to some extent. The kind of parameters for stewardship had been set to some extent, but there was quite a lot of autonomy for local staff to determine what stewardship looked like in their context. And so our role was really to capture those similarities and differences and take all that complexity and turn it into something that speaks their language. So a logic model that actually uses the terms that they use. We also tried to draw in systems thinking here. So we talk about the enablers of stewardship. They're at the kind of foundational levels of our logic model. And you'll see there that's like the culture and mindsets piece. So we're measuring culture and mindsets. We're also measuring conditions, and that's about, are the right conditions in place to equip staff to do the things that they want to do out there, to engage in the ways that they want to engage, and to actually put in place these 4 stewardship practices. And I think we drew on some literature from Emily Gates and some other evaluations that had been conducted into stewardship in a completely different context in the United States, but there was some of the language around practices that we thought actually applied. So we drew in some of that language, but predominantly we used the language that staff were using when they described what stewardship means to them. And then we identified a set of outcomes based on the question we asked about what does stewardship look like when it works well? What are some of the outcomes that you achieve? And we also linked that to some of the departmental objectives and priorities, and they contribute towards our broader goal. We also did some value propositions, and that's for the value for investment piece. So in addition to a logic model, we also thought about what are the value propositions of stewardship for different stakeholder groups. So to give you a bit of a sense of stewardship, because all of this is kind of abstract, evaluation methodology, some of the things that they do on the ground with providers and with the sector, they build their capability and capacity to respond to different pressures that they face. There might be workforce pressures, they might be administrative pressures. They play a role in actually supporting them to build their capability and capacity, and also to know where to go to access the right kinds of government funding so that they can improve their services. They engage really widely, and this is kind of their key practice, is they actually build relationships as far and wide as they can across the state with as many different people they can, not just in aged care, but also in health, building relationships with hospitals, with other organisations that are in regional and rural locations. They also do local solution brokering. So there are some great examples of where they've worked with quite non-traditional stakeholders like mining companies to actually try and find solutions to things like workforce issues. And they gather and they analyse and share local intelligence, especially the voices of older people. So they're actually out there on the ground trying to gather information and feed it back into government so that policy and program staff are aware of the views and perspectives of older Australians and of people across the sector. So that's how we build a logic model, process that in other evaluations can sometimes take a few, a month, you might be lucky. Took us 6 months. So the next phase is planning and implementation, and this was our main phase. We did kind of quarterly sprints of data collection, reflection, and adaptation, and that's about timely feedback. We're still in this phase. We do a whole lot of those technical activities, and they're how we bring the evaluation rigor into it. So we do interviews, surveys, we do case studies, and we also do what I call these kind of live hotspots, where we ask people, what are the things that you really want to know? And we ask policy staff, we also ask staff on the ground. So we're bringing an inquiry focus where we've got key evaluation questions, right? We've got these evaluation questions that we designed, but we can iterate them as we go. We don't say these are the only questions we're going to ask. We say, given the changes in the sector at this point in time, what are the things that you really need to know? What are the questions that you need to ask to answer rapidly? And so we have some forms of data collection that we're collecting consistently over time, and some forms of data collection that we're collecting more rapidly as we go and that we're changing. In the discovery phase, staff said that relationships were really critical for their work, but they had no way of measuring them over time. So they're things like the relationships that they have with providers, the relationships that they have with different people locally, and how critical those relationships are so that they can understand where there might be a provider that might be facing a viability issue and might shut down, and then services might be lost in the system. So it's important that they have those relationships so that those people can call them up and try and trust them and trust to engage with them in good faith. And so we actually started doing relationship mapping. We started looking at, we asked them to map the relationships that they have internally in the department and externally, and to rate the importance of the relationship and the quality of their engagements. And then we fed this back and we highlighted where staff thought there were really important relationships that lacked engagement, and suggesting, does this need some work? And then we can track those over time as well. So we can track shifts in relationships over time with the nature, or how the nature of those relationships might be changing over time, and the extent of those relationships. So they were some really important things that we've been doing, among others. And again, I haven't kind of dived into the value for investment. There are probably some other things. Actually, let me go back and see if there's other things that I really need to talk about. Just that the only other thing I want to say on this phase is that we share back key learnings more rapidly than I probably would in some other evaluation approaches. And I think that's important because that is part of what developmental evaluation should do. We have quarterly reports, but also we might have learning briefs where we have regular interviews that we conduct, or we have surveys that we conduct, and we can slightly tweak those surveys to make sure that they're asking questions that are front of mind for policy and program staff, for example, or for implementation staff. So it's about trying to provide people with the right information at the right times and being kind of flexible in what we're asking and providing that information back to them more rapidly. So things we've done is there's a new rights-based act coming in July, and we've played a key role in sharing back what we've learned to inform the rollout of that act. As an evaluator as well, you end up documenting a lot, and I actually think this is a really critical part of the role that we play, and I document everything, every meeting that we go to. It's all an opportunity to collect information. And then once you've got a large kind of body of data, you can always, once there's a question asked, you can always go back through that data and think, did we have any answers to that question based on conversations we've had over the years with various different people? So that's quite important, providing that kind of intelligence. Phase 3, we haven't got to this phase yet, but it's really about codifying key learnings. It can be in a developmental evaluation. It's often about thinking, all right, what is the model that we're working with? Now that we've been iterating and changing, what have we learned about that? What is the model? You can develop journey maps. Outputs can be varied and, as I said, depend on kind of need. We're providing an interim report and a final report to inform considerations about future investment in regional stewardship. We're providing a learning brief on the different models, or the variation in models across the country, and what that means, and some of the contextual factors that government should consider when thinking about allocating additional resources out there on the ground. But you can provide all kinds of things in a DE. And one of the important things that you want to do in a developmental evaluation, and that we will definitely be doing, we have a whole 6 months dedicated to actually supporting the team to start to pick up and sustain any data collection methods that we've implemented that have been really useful. So that's about the co-creation principle. So it's about ensuring that we're building the capability of those that we're working with to codify the journey so far, so that they can keep collecting data. All right, I know I don't have long. I know we need to kind of wrap up soon, but these are just some of my final thoughts and learnings, I guess. And the first one I shared, it's that there's always a desire to move into a summative approach, and that's important to be aware of. So there's this kind of arc for me in a DE when you've been working for long enough that the focus starts to shift to become more about outcomes. So you're often focused on providing information about the design or development of something, but at some point people need to make decisions. And so I actually think there's a summative component that comes into quite a lot of developmental evaluation. The second thing is that it isn't always done on a national level, developmental evaluation, but I think that this evaluation really demonstrates that it can be. And we've had really positive feedback from our clients. They see the value in an evaluation approach that can be more flexible and adaptive to changes in priorities or staffing, and particularly for an evaluation approach that takes into consideration system transition. And in this case, we're talking about the transition of the aged care system and the level of change that exists. And I think they appreciate that we've been able to pivot our evaluation approach to collect really meaningful information that can support them to make decisions. My third learning is that I think that it actually could play a role in de-risking reform. What do I mean by that? Well, evaluators bring the rigor of our evaluation methods, the transparency, the ethics, some of the key things that are really important to us as a field. We can bring those to the table so that those who are innovating can try new things and can kind of trust that we can quickly identify and report back issues. So I think that evaluation can play a really important role in de-risking innovation and de-risking reform, because we can help identify where there are issues quickly and feed those back to decision makers. Our data collection tools enable us to do that. It relies really heavily on flexible budgeting. Yes, it really does. And we've been lucky enough to have a close relationship with our clients that's enabled us to be really flexible in how we evolve and adapt our approach. So we still have an outputs-based budget, but we have these buckets of funding that are allocated. So we have a bucket of funding allocated for travel, where we've said we know that there's going to be some travel involved in this evaluation. We don't know the extent of it yet. We've got a bucket of funding and we'll use it as we go, and then we can reallocate that if we don't use it for travel. And we have a bucket of funding for sub-consultants as well. So we have a bucket of funding to engage people like Julian King, where we might actually, so we're acknowledging that as evaluators, we might not have all the right skills particularly when we're working in innovation contexts, and that if there's any skills that we don't possess and the department doesn't possess, we can bring in other people. So we've had Taxi do a systems thinking paper for government. That was really interesting. And that was where they were really interested in understanding what systems thinking is and how it can be applied in the public service. And so we engaged the Australian Centre for Social Innovation to do that. 5, and I'll finish really soon, building trust is really important, I think, for a developmental evaluation, particularly if you're involved in the evaluation over time, and it enables you to become a critical friend. And 6, yeah, I think I've mentioned this already, but a key part of developmental evaluation, we have been doing this as we go, but I think it's something that we need to focus on more in future, is building the capabilities of those that we're working with, our clients, to actually apply some of these methods. And particularly when we're talking about developmental evaluation, we're talking about different skill sets that people might not be used to. So there's a key role in building capability. And if you're working in a DE, you might need to describe it to people, because people might not be familiar with the terminology or the approach. So that's me. And I'll throw to you, Erin, for any questions in the chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Zoe. Thank you for that really comprehensive presentation. I think really balanced out the theory of DE with the practical side of it, which, as you know, when you and I have chats at work, I'm like, how are you doing that? You know, really cool to see you kind of bring that through in this presentation. I really loved it. Do have some questions coming through. So actually, one of the questions is about wondering if you might be able to provide us with an alternative metaphor for how you would describe developmental evaluation, because perhaps the one about flying, being in a plane while it's being built might maybe actually put people off a little bit, because no one wants to be being built, like flying while it's being built, if you know what I mean. Like it might distract it a little bit if they're nervous about that sort of thing, or so just wondering if you have an alternative kind of metaphor that you think is helpful for describing it to people.
Oh gosh, I don't know that I do actually, Erin. Yeah, it's a good question. Do you have one?
No, but someone in the chat actually had a really cool idea.
Okay, great.
Suggested framing DE as a way to manage risk and innovation, which isn't necessarily a metaphor, but is a really nice, succinct way of putting it. So are there other ways that you kind of, like maybe a headline you might give people to kind of explain DE to them, maybe to help them more comfortable with their approach as well?
Yeah, I mean, often people come to me when they want a DE, they are working in a really complex context. And I think that DE plays an important role in helping you capture data and feed it back quickly so that you can understand what you're actually working in. That's a really key part of DE. So it is actually helping you grapple with complexity, I guess. And so it is, it's not scary. It really is kind of applying. Evaluation can help synthesize processes and create frameworks, and we bring all of that to to the work. So that if you are working in this complexity and you want to kind of, I don't know, maybe a metaphor is like untangling complexity. That's really what it's like to work with a DE evaluator. I think we come in and we work with you, alongside you as well. We're really working alongside you. We're partnering with you to understand the complexity and help you kind of untangle it and make meaning of it and help make sense of it. That's a lot of what DE does. So yeah, that might be a nicer
I
way
like
to describe it.
the untangling metaphor. I think that
Yeah,
is me as
great.
well. Another question is, how frequently are you providing mini learning briefs or other responsive reporting, in phase 2? And could you share your approach to how you plan those activities and allocate resources to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a mini project plan template that I use. So it's not a huge evaluation framework or evaluation plan with a measurement table. It's really a mini project plan that I would always, and particularly actually in phase 2, what we've learned is it's quite important when we're doing these hotspot evaluations or we're providing these learning briefs to have a mini evaluation plan that includes information like, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of it? Why are we collecting this data, and what's the purpose of the learning brief? And who is it going to go to? What kind of decisions might it help decision makers make? And how much resourcing do we need for it? That's really important, because I know sometimes resourcing can be quite constrained. And something I will say is a bit of a risk in DE is you can be co-opted into other things, because you're open to being flexible. There is a little bit of a risk of being kind of co-opted. So it's important to keep kind of coming back to what is the purpose of collecting this information, who is going to use it, and how long will it take? And I get pretty specific about that, obviously, because I'm managing a team and we have certain resources. So I think about, if I'm developing a survey, how many hours is it going to take to develop that survey? How many hours is it going to take to administer that survey? How many hours is it going to take to so you do all of the things that you would do in a normal evaluation plan, but on a mini level. And how many hours is it going to take to analyze that survey, to write the report for that survey? And we would do this probably, I'd say there'd be 2, maybe 3 learning briefs a year. I think we've just done one where we saw an opportunity to do a big piece of analysis on quarterly reports. And so again, we did a project plan where we went, okay, how long is this analysis going to take? What's the output going to be? And we shared that with our clients so that they were aware of the time allocated to that and what would come about from that. So I hope that answers that question. It's about kind of mini project planning, really, as opposed to these big, long project plans that we often have in evaluation. We still have one of those at an overarching level, by the way, but it's a really overarching level. And we apply the budget more flexibly through these mini project plans. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you're kind of almost constantly in the role of reevaluating your budget and reallocating resources after determining, rigorously, sounds like, this process within scope for what the learning brief is about and, what its use will be for. So yeah, that's really fascinating. Great.
That's right. Yeah.